Good afternoon. We're not using the podium today, just sitting. So I'm pleased to welcome you to the fourth session of Democracy and Disagreement. My co-teacher, Deborah Satz, is in Japan this week. So each of our 10 classes addresses a contemporary issue of policy about which people hold strong differing views. And each class has two goals: to illuminate these issues and to do so by modeling the critical, empirically informed, respectful conversations that lie at the heart of the university's mission, the pursuit of knowledge. The first part of the class will be devoted to such a conversation, today on the topic of gun regulation. During the second part of the class, students will have a chance to ask questions and make comments, not speeches, but comments of the sort appropriate to furthering class discussion. Of course, if you hear something this afternoon about which you disagree, you're encouraged to ask difficult questions to our speakers during the Q&A. We recognize that engaging in respectful conversation is only one mode of bringing one's case to one's fellows. Protest and organizing are also legitimate modes of engagement, although subject to time, place, and manner restrictions. For anyone who feels motivated to protest the class or particular speakers, or to make a long speech, there is a free speech zone outside the classroom for doing so. Before I introduce today's topic and speakers, if you're a student enrolled in the course, could you please scan the QR code on the screen and fill out the Google form for attendance. Our topic today is the extent to which government should regulate or prevent the possession or carrying of firearms. There are two ways to approach these issues. One is to focus on the U.S. Supreme Court's decisions interpreting the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which protects the right of the people to keep and bear arms. The second to ask what would be sound policy, assuming that the government allows, that the Supreme Court allows government to adopt sound policies. If this were a law school class, we might focus on the former, including its many arcane arguments about the Supreme Court's originalist methods of interpretation. As a person who coined the term originalism, I'm tempted to get into those weeds, but I and our guests will resist that temptation. Rather, we're going to assume that the Constitution, either in its present form or as amended or interpreted differently in the future, permits governments to enact sound policies and focus on what those policies might be. Leading off the discussion will be my law school colleague, John Donohue, one of the leading empirical researchers in the Legal Academy. Professor Donohue is an economist as well as a lawyer and is well known for using empirical analysis to determine the impact of law and policy in a wide range of areas, including civil rights and anti-discrimination law, employment discrimination, criminal justice and the death penalties, and factors influencing crime such as guns, incarceration, policing, and legalized abortion. Responding to Professor Donohue will be Professor Eugene Volokh. For the past 30 years, he was a professor at the University of California, School of Law, where he first taught First Amendment law, where he has taught First Amendment law, copyright law, criminal law, tort law, and firearms regulation policy. Among his writings is a major textbook on the First Amendment and related statutes and academic legal writing. He's also the founder of the very popular blog Volokh Conspiracy. Stanford is extremely fortunate that Professor Volokh will be joining the Hewlett Institution full-time this coming September. We imagine the speakers will converse for about 50 minutes. The floor will then be open for questions or comments from the audience. To allow as much participation as possible, please keep your questions to a minute or less. We'll also survey the audience at the beginning and end of each class to see whether arguments moved minds. That said, even when minds are not moved, we hope that the class gives you an appreciation for the reasoning behind the views you hold, as well as those you reject. And here on the screen will now be the question we're posing today. Assuming that it's permitted by the U.S. Constitution, should California enact this policy? It shall be unlawful for individuals other than law enforcement officers to carry a handgun outside of their own premises. Take your time and answer the poll. I think that will appear on the screen, and then Professor Donahue will begin the conversation. We'll wait just a minute and see how the polling comes out. So there's a lot of room for minds to be changed. John.
Okay, I'm delighted to be here, and I think this particular topic is a wonderful one for a discussion because there are so many complex legal, empirical, and even philosophical issues that are relevant to the determination. So I'm very grateful that Eugene is with us. Anytime you're talking about the issue of gun policy, it's probably helpful to have as a background fact the element that the United States stands alone among affluent countries in terms of its overall homicide rate. And as you can see here, that's overwhelmingly because of the very high rate of firearm homicide. And this graphic, I think, is useful. What it shows along the horizontal axis is the wealth of the nation by GDP per capita, and the vertical axis is showing the homicide rate. And you see that every country richer than Russia is below the regression line in the lower right quadrant, which is where you'd like to be, because those are the rich, low homicide countries. But there's one country well above the regression line. The red dot is for the United States. Indeed, it would look much worse if we didn't lock up more people than any nation in prior history. That number would be higher in terms of the homicide rate if we had the same level of incarceration as our affluent competitor countries. And so right away you should ask, is it likely that we would be moving towards the lower quadrant homicide rate if we mimicked the gun policies of our competitor nations, all of whom are vastly more restrictive than the United States, or move in the opposite direction, and which way will bring us closer to that lower right quadrant? So you've already seen the question of the day, and I guess the major difference between Eugene and me is he believes in the general promiscuous toting of guns, while I think it should be sharply restricted. Now, why do I use this terminology? The traditional NRA view was articulated by the former president of the NRA, the only Olympic gold medal winner ever to serve as the president of the NRA, who testified before Congress that he did not believe in the general promiscuous toting of guns. I think it should be sharply restricted and only under licenses. So I support the NRA position of 1938. There's no reason why on the street today a citizen should be carrying loaded weapons. When I mentioned this particular quote in one NRA audience, they immediately said, well, this is obviously AOC or some other communist-oriented Democrat. This was Ronald Reagan. And again, many say, well, of course, the definition of a gun control supporter is a conservative who's been shot, so this obviously came after he was shot. No, this was in May 1967. So it turns out that if you were going to leave it up to Americans to decide whether they should carry guns or not, it would be helpful if they had a clue about the risks and benefits of gun ownership. And unfortunately, most Americans do not have that knowledge, and therefore they cannot make rational choices. It turns out Americans are terrible at estimating the risk of crime, much worse than estimating the risk of almost every other potential bad outcome. So respondents put their chance of being robbed in the coming year at 15%, which is more than an order of magnitude higher than the real risk of being robbed. And they're also terrible at understanding just the level of crime, whether crime is going up or down. And of course, this level of ignorance makes them very vulnerable to special interests like the gun lobby and their affiliated politicians, Again, just to give a sense of the misjudgments, the lower green line in this chart shows you what was happening with violent crime. And of course, the years of the Clinton administration of 1993 to 2000 were the greatest drop in American history in terms of violent crime. But still, large percentages of the population, even with this momentous drop in crime going on, thought that crime was rising. And you can see that this divergence has only grown over time, in part because there are special interests who have an incentive, both political and financial, in making Americans think crime is worse than it is. Way back in 1986, very large parts of the nation had some approximation of the law that you were asked to vote on. The red states in this particular graphic did not allow issuance of concealed carry permits. But by 2023, things had changed very dramatically. The green states now pretty much allow anyone who can sit up and take nourishment to carry guns outside the home if they are not otherwise burdened by federal law. I asked one of my Stanford Law School classes which of these three large states has the highest murder rate, and astonishingly to me, almost everyone in the class said that New York had the highest murder rate and Texas had the lowest murder rate. That's something you'll hear a lot suggested on Fox News, but the actual fact is New York, by a wide margin, has the lowest murder rate, California next, and Texas is quite a bit above that. But from 1871 to 1995, Texas actually banned all carrying of handguns outside the home for protection. And in 1995, when that ban ended, they had a 20% lower murder rate than California and only a slightly higher murder rate than New York. But after 25 years of the New York and California increasing gun restrictions as Texas went in the other direction, Texas now has a 27% higher murder rate than California and a 75% higher murder rate than New York. So the Supreme Court now seems to want to push us in the direction of Texas, and by imposing greater permissiveness on American law will likely move us in that direction. Justice Alito in the 2022 Bruen case cited an NRA expert to make it suggest that the overwhelming evidence suggests that there's no statistically significant increase in violent crime when you allow right to carry laws. Notice they're not suggesting that there's any benefit, they're just saying, this is again, the NRA expert is saying, well, we don't see evidence of an increase. But in fact, the RAND Corporation in January 2023 said that right to carry laws increase total and firearm homicide at its highest level of evidentiary support. Why is this thing giving me a hard time now? And I just cite 18 studies over the last 6 years that concurred with that. Justice Alito was obviously concerned about the need to protect yourself, and he said, you know, people had to protect themselves in 1791 and have the same need today, and the Second Amendment guarantees that right. Again, I'm having trouble getting the slides to advance. But what he didn't ask was, will more people be victimized by guns if we allow the promiscuous gun carrying that the Supreme Court seems to be endorsing? That is the central question of gun policy. Alito doesn't address the question, doesn't even seem to know there's an issue to consider, but according to almost every dimension, America is in a position that would counsel greater restriction on guns today than in 1791. First of all, there was no police department anywhere in the United States in 1791. The largest city was New York with 40,000 residents. Today, New York City has 36,000 police. And you can just see all of these other factors which cut against having more guns today. Crime is a lot lower than it was in 1791. And looking at some empirical evidence that me and my team put out, the percentage of robberies committed with a firearm rises after right to carry adoption. Why would that be? Because when the criminals think that more people are carrying, they're more likely to carry. And so we end up with no reduction in robberies, but now more armed robberies, which is a bad trade-off. Another study that we did looking at 65 cities, enormous increases in gun thefts, because once you take the gun outside the home, guns are sort of a pain in the neck to carry with you at all times, so they get put down and left behind and stolen a lot. And perhaps people might not be aware of this, but the violent crime clearance rate also falls when right to carry laws are passed. You just make the job of police a lot harder when more and more people are carrying guns, and also they have to deal with that hundreds of thousands of guns stolen, so you're wasting police time on things that they could be focusing on in terms of reducing crime. Police shootings go up. We have an enormously higher police shooting rate, again, because the only thing that police have to fear besides COVID is getting shot, and road rage incidents go up as well. I do want to quote from the Federalist Papers, because I think philosophically, at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, this captured an important reality. The vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty. A dangerous ambition more often lurks behind the specious mask of zeal for the rights of people than under the forbidden appearance of zeal for the firmness and efficiency of government. And they went on to say, of those men who have overturned the liberties of republics, the greatest number have begun their career by paying an obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants. And I think if you follow 100 years later, when the statute that you were voting on today, which, as I mentioned, was adopted in 1871 in Texas, and here it was challenged, they mimicked the same language. It said it's useless to talk about personal liberty being infringed by laws such as this restriction on gun carrying. The world has seen too much licentiousness cloaked under the name of natural or personal liberty. Also helpful to note that that statute was adopted with unanimous support from the black members of the Texas legislature, because they realized that they would be better protected if guns were taken off the street. And how have things played out in Texas now that anyone can carry? A couple of quick examples. Someone in 2022 was firing at someone who had stolen some money from him at an ATM, killed a 9-year-old girl who was in a car just driving by going to a Valentine's Day party. A week earlier, also in Houston, road rage incident left another 9-year-old girl with a bullet in her head. Houston, which used to have the same murder rate as New York City, now has 3 times the murder rate. And of course, a lot of people have this fanciful notion that if I'm carrying a gun, I will be safe. Remember the example of Chris Kyle and his former Marine colleague, Chad Littlefield, both carrying guns, shot 6 and 7 times each by a 25-year-old, and they never got their guns out of their holsters. Texas superintendent resigns after a 3rd grader found his gun in the bathroom. Texas governor plans to pardon man convicted of murdering Black Lives Matter protester. That's sort of what happens when guns are promiscuously toted.
I have my own. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak about the subject here. It's a tremendously important subject, and it's a pleasure and honor to be speaking with someone who is one of the leading empirical scholars on the subject. I am not. I have written some things, although not as much as other people have, on the Second Amendment issues. I actually think that the empirical issues are much more interesting in many ways than the constitutional ones. I'm just a consumer of that information rather than a producer, so it's very good to be here with John. So I start with the same slides that you saw already there, but let's move on a little bit. And I want to mention a couple of big picture things. Why is this not working? Okay. So one is Whenever we want to talk about a proposed law, and we are talking here specifically, in the Q&A we may talk about broader things, we're talking specifically about restrictions on concealed carry, we have to ask the right question. So first of all, questions are what are the costs and benefits of a proposed policy? Not what are the costs and benefits of the regulated activity, or would we be better off in a blank free world? So just by way of an analogy, remember prohibition, right? Ultimately, the country concluded that the costs and benefits of prohibiting alcohol weighed sharply on the side of the costs. Now, what are the costs and benefits of alcohol? It may very well be that if we could have an alcohol-free world, maybe things would be better. Alcohol does have some health benefits. I'm told is still the case. I think the American Heart Association still takes that view. But on balance, it certainly causes a tremendous amount of harm as well. Likewise, with regard to drugs. It may very well be that we'd be better off in a drug-free world, and that the costs and benefits of drugs cut sharply against the benefits. But it doesn't mean that war on drugs is a good idea. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's good to have war on some drugs and not others. All interesting questions, but the important question is this first one. It's also important to ask what are the costs of this particular proposal. So I think it's important to consider one proposal at a time. So for example, so far as the costs, gun carry bans, for instance, one of the reasons that some people support them is they won't interfere with self-defense in the home. So people say, I probably wouldn't carry a gun in any case, but in my home, I particularly need and feel particularly entitled to defend myself. Gun carry bans wouldn't prohibit that. Likewise, they may yield less political pushback than gun possession bans or gun confiscation. There are 400 million guns, as best we can tell, in America. They're not going anywhere. So if you're trying to ban guns, that's a lot of guns you're going to have to ban, and a lot of people who are going to essentially become enemies of the government when they realize the government is trying to take away those guns. Maybe less so with regard to gun carry, which many guns owners do, but most actually don't. At least most don't routinely. At the same time, if you look at the benefits of this particular proposal, you have to understand they're limited, and I'm by no means saying that John is denying this here, but just some people, for example, say, well, we worry about gun deaths, majority of which are suicides. Well, whatever gun carry bans will do, they will do very, very little against suicide. Unless you imagine, and I don't think this is the way it is, that suicide is really something that people do because just on the spur of the moment they decide to do this. Obviously, if a person owns a gun but isn't carrying it, just needs to go home. Likewise, gun carry bans won't affect pre-planned homicide, except in the rare circumstances where somebody on his way to, say, a mass shooting or deliberate murder is pulled over by the police, is frisked, they see a gun, and then they arrest him. That's really very rare. Somebody who's willing to violate the laws against mass murder or murder is going to violate the laws against gun possession as well. Really, the thing that we might envision, John has said, well, we may diminish gun thefts, maybe, although again, I don't think the mass shooters are going to be much affected by that. It will also may also diminish kind of spur of the moment crimes when there's an argument that turns into shooting. You can imagine that, but don't expect it to solve, say, mass shooting problem. Okay, so one question you might ask is, how often are guns used defensively? And the answer is we don't know for sure by any means. This information is not logged by the police in any coherent way, among other things because many gun users do not actually come to the attention of the police. Somebody, for example, if they use a gun to chase away a burglar, they may not even call the police. They may say, what's the point? They're not going to be able to catch him. Or if they call the police, they may not tell the police, oh, I used the gun to scare away the burglar, either because they're just not thinking that that's an important thing to say. They're more worried about who the burglar was and catching the burglar, or because they say, who knows? I think I'm within the law. I think my gun is lawfully owned, but especially in a state like California, maybe you don't want the police to know that I was using a gun this way. So what do we have? We have survey evidence. Survey evidence has a lot of flaws. At the same time, it's probably the best thing we've got. So here is from the National Academy of Sciences 2013, and it says almost all national survey estimates give results from about 500,000 to 3 million a year. Now, it does note there's a radically lower estimate of only about 100,000, but it seems to suggest, in part because it is such an outlier, that's probably not right. Most recent estimate that I've seen is from the National Firearms Survey 2021. It was conducted by William English, whose judgment John disapproves of, it seems, but this is not out of line with what even Phil Cook at one point in one of his studies found, although Cook has argued that there is actually there's reason to think that that's an overcount, but when you do run these studies, by and large, they show over a million defensive gun uses a year. So what are examples of defensive gun uses? And I should stress, these are anecdotal. These are just examples. We're going to talk a little bit more about whether we can figure out more than just anecdotes, but it's useful to have them in mind. So the FBI puts together this active shooter incidents in the United States report every year. This is from 2022. It's the most recent one. And it's basically for mass shootings under a certain definition. Of course, what is a mass shooting or not is hard to tell. There are about 50 listed by the FBI in 2022, actually exactly 50. In 8 of them, citizens intervened in order to end the incident. The ones that I marked in red are the ones where they intervened with firearms. Now, this is just 3 out of the 50. There are others that obviously they did not intervene. Maybe they didn't have an opportunity to. Maybe they were in zones where guns were prohibited, as they still are in certain places. Maybe there just wasn't somebody carrying a gun there, or maybe the person carrying the gun figured they wanted just to hide rather than try to stop this. But this has happened. And by the way, there are other incidents in which somebody, for example, tried to use a knife, got killed. Maybe if he had had a gun, he would have been able to stop the shooting, although maybe not, hard to know. But these things do happen, and this is not just this one year. Every year there's some number of these active shooter, mass shooting incidents that are stopped by a defensive user, and there the denominator is just the number of the mass incidents, which of course are a small fraction of all of the gun crimes. So here's one of them, for example, of Charleston, West Virginia. This is just an excerpt from a local TV news station. This 37-year-old guy, who it turns out had an extensive criminal history, so he was not legally allowed to own a gun, but unsurprisingly, having not followed other laws in the past, he wasn't following gun control laws either. He was speeding up and down a parking lot inside the Vista View Apartments. Vista View Apartments, I don't know much about them. They're in Charleston, West Virginia, but a bit of Googling suggests that they're low-income apartments. They're federally subsidized. He was approached by people attending a graduation party and a birthday party who asked him to slow down. Sometimes happens when you speed in a residential neighborhood. He seemed agitated, left, came back with an AR-15 rifle. Again, there was gun control law prohibiting him from possessing it. He didn't seem to care. And started shooting the crowd. A woman pulled out her pistol, shooting and killing him. Now, again, it could have gone worse. It could have been that he would have shot her first. It could have been that she could have shot a bystander. But that's just an example. I'll give you another example, which is noteworthy in part because it is comes from an appellate court decision. So there was actually a trial. There were a trial of the criminal who was stopped. But there was actually a lot of fact finding. So we have a lot more details here than one might think. So Hill and Levant, two armed robbers, walked into an apartment in the middle of a party, ordered everybody to lie down, took their property, forced the men to go into a back bedroom, 2 of the women into another bedroom, and 2 other women remained in the living room. And Levant, at some one point, apparently said to Hill, according to the evidence, "We're about to have sex with these girls, then we're going to kill them all." So Barner, who was one of the guests, heard Hill and Levant discussing condoms and the number of bullets in their guns, decided he needed to act. He had, because in Georgia you were allowed to, he had a gun in the book bag that he had brought to his party. And as it happens, the bag was in the bedroom where he was lying. It was a mistake on the part of the criminals to put him in the same bedroom. So he sees Hill standing by the front door, opens fire on Hill, and then rushes back to the bedroom where Levant was holding 2 of the women, shouts for everyone to get down, starts shooting at Barner. Levant starts shooting at Barner. Barner shoots back. As it happens, one of the women was hit in the arm and both legs, whether it was by it wasn't actually legally relevant. It was all the fault of the criminals, of course. But she survived, and everybody else survived, except one of the killers. And actually, the trial was for felony murder of the killer by the other killer, an interesting legal theory. So, these things happen. And again, we know that we can guess the defense of gun uses happen probably around 1 million times a year. Very few of them involve gun even being shot. A lot of them are just involve the gun being displayed. Now, is gun self-defense effective? Again, according to the National Academy of Sciences, studies have found lower injury rates among gun-using crime victims compared with victims who used other self-protective strategies. It's also compared to those who use no self-protective strategies. I've seen at least one of those studies. Now, of course, it's very likely to vary quite sharply, but that's the best we can tell. Now, what about the bigger picture? Do indeed bans on concealed carry decrease total homicide? Do they decrease total crime? Does allowing concealed carry increase it? So this is from a 2004 National Academy's report. It says, I'm quoting 2013 report. Research results have been inconsistent. It in turn quotes a 2005 National Academies of Science report, which talks about the current evidence it's not possible to determine a causal link between passage of right to carry laws and crime rates. Now, what about more recent evidence, much of which is produced by John, or co-produced by John? Well, this is from the RAND report that John was citing. And if you focus on shall issue or permitless versus may or no issue, remember shall issue and permitless, those are the blue and green states, which occupy roughly half and half. Even before Bruin, that was the whole country. And now it's basically still half and half. In half you need a license, but you're allowed to get a license, and half you don't need a license. That's the permitless. So if you look at total homicide rate, not the firearms homicide rate, which I think is not the right thing you want to look at, because the question is how many people die, and if there's some displacement of firearms homicide over other homicide, for example, knife homicides fall, firearms homicides increase by the same amount, that shouldn't matter to us. So if you look at the total homicide rate, basically all the studies report basically no statistically significant or even nearly statistically significant correlation. Now, again, if you look at just the firearms, the result is more mixed, but again, I don't think that's the right one. Now, if you do look at the shall issue, which is there is a permit required, but the government has to give it to you so long as you pass certain objective requirements, then the result is more mixed. And some studies do purport to show a statistically significant increase as a result of shall issue, which seems to suggest that requiring no permit, allowing somebody just to drop the gun in their pocket and walk without a permit, is actually safer from the public's perspective than requiring permits but making them broadly available. Hard to know. Maybe that's a reason to go to permitless. But again, if you compare the loose gun rules, shall issue and permitless on one side, and the restrictive may or no issue on the other, that's what you get. Now, what about other violent crime? So if you look at total violent crime, you do see a mix. Some of them basically are no statistically significant correlation, and not even nearly that. So 1.00 with a range of 0.97 to 1.03, smack in the middle. Some may be a little closer to one side or another. So you see all of those zero correlations, except for three things that show, actually two that show statistically significant correlation, and two more that show nearly statistically significant. And all of them are Donahue articles. So again, you have somebody here who is doing tremendously important work, and it is very possible that he is right and everyone else is wrong. Or perhaps he is right and everybody else has conducted surveys that, while correct on their own, studies, while correct on their own, just haven't focused on the right things to see that. So that the statistically insignificant results simply mean that they weren't looking for the right things. But as best I can tell, what we're seeing, the evidence, the jury is out, but the evidence as I see it from these studies is there are interesting studies, but the bulk of them suggest that basically there's no real effect. So then the question, what do you do about it? And I think that self-defense is important enough, and people's ability to be able to defend themselves, even in public places, is important enough to allow them to do that, especially since the alternative is a pretty significant ratcheting up of criminal law enforcement, more people going to prison, more criminal prosecutions and such, just for gun possession. But again, maybe one day we'll see, the Donahue results were all right and all the other ones were all wrong. And then we might have a very different approach. But this is what I think we stand right now.
You need a microphone, John.
I do see that 4 of these studies are done by Hamel, who is quite a strong. Is that better? Thank you, Paul. Hamel, as you know, has done 4 of the studies there, and very strong pro-gun researcher. But I think Eugene raises an important question. These are very challenging empirical projects. You do want to see the best social science brought to bear. I should highlight one thing that I said in my opening remarks, that for a long time Rand was uncertain what the consequences were, but in their final report they did indicate that at the highest level of evidentiary standards that they apply, the conclusion was right to carry laws would increase both gun homicide and overall homicide. So that was a conclusion based in part on my work, but a number of others. And I cited 18 studies in the last 6 years that reached that result as well. But, you know, one thing that's really, really important to underscore is teasing out the causal effect of laws is a challenging task. Luckily at Stanford, there are some really highly talented people working on these issues, and I encourage you to study and learn from them, help us get better data so that we can more convincingly answer these questions. I do think a couple of things quickly I'll say, and then I'll turn it back, is I'm very skeptical about even 1 million claimed defensive gun uses. And the report that Eugene alluded to in 2013 was a sort of a lamentable report from my view. It embodied some of the worst pathologies of President Obama, because after the Sandy Hook killing, when many jurisdictions passed restrictive gun laws in trying to deal with the mass shooting problem, Obama called for an independent panel to, study the issue, put on one of the most pro-gun NRA experts, Gary Kleck, who was the one who did those studies that claimed that there were very large numbers. And if you read the document, it says many surveys find X, but those surveys all have been very, very severely criticized by the academic literature, not by me, but by other scholars around the country. Just to give you one quick assessment of how they reached that result, Gary Kleck would contact people and say, did you use a gun in the last year to thwart a crime? And so a huge percentage of those were, someone was trying to steal my bike and I took out my gun and told the 15-year-old kid, put down my bike or I'll shoot you. So even if we got 1 million of those, probably not a good idea. David Hemingway at Harvard said when he has judges to evaluate the circumstances of these, a very substantial number of them were instances where someone aggressively started a dispute and then took out their gun, saying that when someone responded to their aggressive actions, they ended the threat of crime. And the thing that I think is most damaging for that array of studies is that the conclusion that Kleck reached based on those studies was that it saved between 340,000 and 400,000 lives a year because of these gun interventions, which, given the fact that at the time of this work, the United States had never had more than 25,000 murders, the idea that gun defensive use could have saved anywhere even close to 340,000 to 400,000 crimes is really fanciful, and I think it underscores the deep inadequacies of that study. One final thing, again, I mentioned that Kleck asked him, did you use a gun in the last year to thwart a crime? 1% of the people did, and then he said, well, 1% of 250 million adults gives you 2.5 million. But he didn't mention that in these types of studies, if you ask, did you take a ride in an alien spaceship in the last year? About 1% of Americans say, yes, I did take a ride in an alien spaceship.
They needed to use guns to defend themselves against.
And about 1% of adults have schizophrenia.
So I should say again, though, your co-author, Phil Cook, ran a study, the Police Foundation study, which found 1.5 million. Now, he quite plausibly points out some of the things that you do, that maybe the respondents are crazy, or maybe they're lying, or whatever, or possibly that maybe some of those defensive gun users, they're mischaracterizing them, they were actually offensive, or maybe they were defensive but illegally or wrongly done. But just to make clear, this result has been repeated by many people other than Gary Kleck, including, again, Phil Cook, who is, I have great respect for, but I think it's clear that he is a pro-gun control scholar. That, maybe all of them are wrong, and maybe the real number is 100,000 or even less. It's just, when surveys are probably the best source of data we've got, and when one survey says 100,000 and all the others seem to say a lot more, it looks probable that the majority of the studies are more correct. But maybe not. Maybe they're all wrong.
Yeah, I would just say the National Crime Victimization Survey, which had the much, much lower number, essentially is a vastly larger survey of 150,000 respondents. It also has much more of the, well, first of all, a huge budget, so it can be run with much more sophistication than any single researcher interviewing 1,200 to 2,000 people could possibly engage in. And they had the significantly lower number. Again, also remember that Kleck is adding up defensive gun uses where people say someone was acting angrily at me and I used the gun defensively. Sometimes what it means is I heard a noise at night and I went out on my back porch and I said, get out of here. And I had my gun with me. So perhaps it was the cat knocking over the trash can. And also many of those, probably by far most of those, are dealing with property crimes, not threats to personal violence.
Let me just note that the 1.67 million number comes from a recent study that interviewed 54,000 residents. So to the extent that the concern is that that some of the studies are very small studies, this is a bigger study. Again, maybe it's wrong in other ways too, but that's where.
William English.
Yes. Well, and Phil Cook and Gary Kleck and the others, but okay, maybe they're all wrong. Okay, should we just turn to Q&A or maybe to you?
Before we turn to Q&A, is this working? Yeah. I have a couple of questions for you. First, an easy one. Even though we're not talking about constitutional law, both of you referred to Bruen, and maybe you can just explain to the class what the Bruen case is about, so it's not a mystery to them.
Sure. So Bruen held that the right of the people to keep and bear arms is a right not just to keep in the sense of possess, but to bear in the sense of carry. It said not all people, not under all circumstances, but as a general matter, law-abiding Americans, at least American adults. Interesting question, by the way. Does that cut in at 18 or 21? There's actually a lot of litigation on that. Law-abiding American adults have a right to carry, generally speaking, both on their own property but also in public places, except certain sensitive places where there's something of a tradition of allowing restrictions, such as courthouses, legislatures, and such, and schools. Another important thing that Bruen said which goes beyond just a right to carry, is that it said that the validity of restrictions has to be judged looking at history and tradition. So the question is whether traditionally these kinds of gun control laws have been seen as valid either because courts have upheld them or because there was a long tradition of legislative action. In that respect, it's kind of like the way some criminal procedure rights have been interpreted, where the question is, what does the confrontation clause mean? When are you entitled to confront witnesses against you? When are you entitled to have a jury trial in your criminal case or your civil case? The answer is you look at the history, preferably around the framing, but also in some measure not long after the framing to try to determine that. That too is a very controversial feature of Bruen, but that cuts across the question that we're talking about, which is the gun carry question.
Right. You can see why we're not talking about Bruen. The interpretive issues in Bruen make rabbit holes look pretty easy by comparison. So I have a couple of methodological questions. One is listening to both of you analyze the empirical studies makes it pretty clear that for laypersons like most of the rest of us, understanding conflicting empirical studies, especially surveys, but any kind of empirical studies, is really difficult. What advice can you give to us on how we can interpret complex empirical studies?
It's a challenge, and indeed, within the academy, there are even disputes. So some econometricians will be very skeptical of almost all empirical studies because they recognize that it is a challenge. As I said, some very important work by some of the tremendously gifted academics here at Stanford is trying to improve the methodologies. And indeed, the very first study to look at right to carry adoption was by John Lott, who's a very smart academic researcher who initially concluded that right to carry laws would reduce crime. And that was way back in 1997 that his first study came out. And if you follow the pattern of econometric development over time, there has been a recognition that many of the earlier tools that we were optimistic would yield correct answers are no longer the best. So people like Guido Imbens here at Stanford, a Nobel Prize winner, is one of the pioneers in developing new tools. And so we're constantly hoping that the application of these new and better tools, and hopefully with new and better data, will give us greater clarity on these very challenging empirical issues.
Isn't it really simple, though? You just do a double-blind study. You randomly split the country into two halves. You figure out which policy is best, and you don't tell either half which half they're in, right? Yeah, so it's famously extraordinarily difficult to judge things when you can't do double-blind designs. I mean, even double-blind studies are hard to evaluate. So it's very hard to do good studies. There's a lot of situations where there's no consensus in good studies, and you're absolutely right that trying to evaluate the quality of them is for a layperson, I don't know, very hard.
So, John, you want to say something more about
No, I
this?
was just going to encourage the audience to study social science and get us to better empirical methods.
Yes, no one ever regrets knowing more math. You might think you regret it, but you don't. You won't.
So, both of you use statistical analysis, but both of you also used anecdotes, specific cases where the result was good or bad from the point of view you're arguing. What's the role? What's the role of anecdotes in what's essentially policy analysis using data?
You do have to be obviously very cautious about anecdotes, but they can be helpful. Eugene put up some of the anecdotal evidence about taking out mass shooters, and that's important to know that this does happen, so we can try to evaluate, on balance, is the anecdote something that is so rare that it really shouldn't govern our policy, or is it illuminating of something that we really need to attend to? And I do think in general, a lot of times it's pretty easy to know how a gun could be helpful. It's not always immediately obvious the ways in which guns can go terribly awry, and that's why I tried to use some of the anecdotes that I think at least illuminate this question that, you know, if you talk to some of the more enthusiastic gun carriers, they think if I have my gun, you know, only good things are going to happen. And you saw 9-year-old girls getting killed. You know, you saw Chris Kyle, you know, the #1 Navy SEAL sniper in American history, killed, never getting his gun out of his holster. And again, killed by one guy, and there were 2 Marines with guns in their holster. So it's not as though, even under the best of circumstance, where you're one of the most gifted marksmen of all time, that you're going to be able to defend yourself. So at least in that sense, anecdotes can be useful. But at the end of the day, we do have to make these judgments about what the overall effect would be. And you know, we're making them today with at least the benefit of statistical analysis. Remember back in 1871, when the Texas law that we were debating first was adopted, there was some debate, and indeed Bruin cited the claim that black Texans would be better off if they were given guns to protect themselves. Instead, the black senators and House representatives in Texas decided they would be better if guns were taken away. So they were making that empirical assessment, but without the benefit of some of the information we have today.
Yeah, so I agree with much of what John is saying about the methodological points. I do think that in a country of 330 million people, you can find an anecdote for everything. And I also certainly agree that anybody who thinks, if I only carry a gun, I will be perfectly safe, is a fool. I'm not sure how many people actually think that, because most of us, by the time we become adults, realize nothing will make us perfectly safe. In fact, nothing will make us perfectly anything. That most of the things we do, you know, we put on a seatbelt, does it guarantee that it will save our lives? No, of course not. And anybody who thinks that is likewise foolish. Likewise, anybody who thinks, you know, and I'm sure John will agree with me, that if we just ban concealed gun carrying, then the consequence will be that people will no longer commit crimes with concealed guns because they won't be carrying concealed guns. That can't be right, because we know for every law some people disobey the law. With that, I generally agree. I will say, though, from your perspective, as people who will be making arguments in all walks of life, it could be as to criminology, it could be in business, it could be you're making a presentation to your boss, and here's some statistical study that you did. It's still helpful to illustrate it through a particular example, because I think that's the way human minds work. Thankfully, human minds are capable of handling kind of big picture points and recognizing that anecdotes are imperfect. But at the same time, I think they need some mental illustration of what's going on in order to grasp what the generality is really talking about. So that's why I think, certainly in my briefs, when I file a brief, I make legal points, I sometimes make statistical points, but I always try to illustrate with concrete illustrations.
Right. So the anecdotes are designed really to give life to the statistics.
Yeah, exactly.
So one last question. Neither of you have talked the language of rights. Judicial opinions, constitutional opinions are all about rights, or mainly about rights. But policy arguments also involve rights. If you look at the abortion debate, there's a lot of talk about rights. What role, if any, do rights play in the policy argument about whether or not people should be able to carry guns?
Yeah.
Use
So
the microphone.
I mean, obviously, there is sort of an underlying philosophical question here. And when you think about certain rights, we're willing to give up a lot to protect, the rights of free speech and so on and so forth. I could see that you could give up a lot to protect the rights of women to have control over their body. It doesn't seem to me a right to keep and bear a gun for personal self-defense is really something that you would be willing to give or should be willing to give up a lot for. And I think the reason that the right was in there was essentially, at the time, it was thought, we don't want standing armies. This is a way that we can avoid having standing armies. Since that is no longer the case, it's the United States government's military that provides the defense of the nation. We don't really need to think in terms of a right to keep and bear arms if you're trying to think of good policy. And indeed, until 2008, the Supreme Court did not think of this amendment in that way. So it was really a reviving of what is, in my view, probably an anachronistic notion of a right to keep and bear arms.
Well, so I think there are two things going on here. One, which John brought up, I'm not sure is necessary to Paul's question, but certainly is out there, is historical. What we historically understood the right to keep and bear arms to be. And I think, and it would be a whole other long discussion, I think that throughout American history, generally speaking, the right to keep and bear arms has been seen as an individual right, with some exceptions, but generally speaking that. And it has been seen as a right that is, at least in considerable part, about self-defense. If you look at the state constitutions, I think 45 at this point of the 50 states have right to bear arms provisions in their constitutions. Many of them are very explicit that it is a self-defense right. And that goes back to the 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution, which talked about the right of the people to keep and bear arms, I think, maybe just bear arms, in defense of themselves and the state. So it was both meant as a collective, or having a collective goal as a means of maintaining an armed citizenry, as a bulwark against state oppression, but also themselves individually. And if you think, well, themselves might mean a collective, but not the state, some sub-state collective, although then the question is who owns or possesses such a right, quite quickly, I think starting with the 18 teens, it was a right of every citizen to keep and bear arms in defense of himself and the state. And I don't think this is because the right was reconceptualized from 1776 and 1791 to 1818, let's say. It's because that's the way it was understood all along. But, and also I think if you look at the Supreme Court, it's true, did not confront the Second Amendment quite explicitly until 1939, when it seemed to adopt a more collective rights view and then changed that in 2008. But if you look at other Supreme Court decisions at various times, they just sort of casually assumed that there was an individual right to bear arms. And I think for self-defense, although one can say maybe it's an individual right, but not for self-defense. But there's a broader point, I think, which is regardless of the history, we needn't be shackled by our history. The question is what makes sense now. And I have to say, I'm not somebody who thinks that there is a kind of fundamental, completely unabridgeable right to possess guns for self-defense. I'm not sure I think of a lot of unabridgeable rights, but you can imagine a few that are at least extraordinarily difficult to abridge. I do think if I were persuaded that gun control laws, certainly bans on gun carry, would substantially decrease violent crime, I would be open to the possibility of a constitutional amendment or to allow those. But I do think there's an important presumption here. And I think there is a clear individual right, that's the right to self-defense. A right to be able to defend yourself against murder, against rape, against kidnapping, against violent assault, against robbery. Now, maybe not against ordinary theft. You have the right to use non-lethal force to defend yourself. And in most states, you have a right to threaten lethal force to defend your property, but not to actually use lethal force to defend property, with some exceptions. But I do think there's a basic right to defend yourself, at least against serious crimes. And I think that carries with it a presumptive right to have the necessary tools to effectively defend yourself. And that's both effectively to defend yourself against criminals who are going to have guns and knives and various other deadly weapons regardless of what the law is, and also against criminals who may not have guns and knives and such, but who are just a lot bigger and stronger than you are. So I do think there's at least a substantial presumption in favor of people being able to have the tools necessary to defend themselves. Now, where I disagree with some people is I think that presumption probably should be rebuttable in some measure. I just don't think it's been rebutted at this point. But I do think this is something where there is an important, albeit perhaps defeasible, underlying right that's implicated.
John, do you want to have the last word before we open it up?
Yeah, just quickly. One very interesting study that was done by the aforementioned Phil Cook and Anthony Braga, looking at 511 cases of gunshot wounds in Boston, found that the decisive factor in deciding who lived and who died, or one of the decisive factors, was the lethality of the weapon that was used. And they concluded in that study that you could reduce the homicide rate in Boston by 40% if all of the bullet wounds had been delivered from a smaller caliber gun than the ones that were actually used. 40% reduction in homicide just from reducing the lethality of the weaponry. And one anecdote that I think drives that home about how the nature of guns have changed over time is that when John Hinckley tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan, he used a .22 caliber gun with 6 bullets in it, fired all 6, which is what pretty much always happens in these sorts of events, hit 4 people, none of them died. Today, the same assassination attempt would be with a much more powerful gun, many more bullets, and much more likely to cause more deaths. So I do think, even though everyone agrees there's a right to defend yourself, the idea that there's a right to defend yourself with a semi-automatic rifle or even an automatic rifle, as some contend, borders on the frivolous, as Justice Scalia might say.
Now we're shifting to a different policy proposal, which has its own pluses and minuses. I mean, if we could debate whether there should be caliber limits or something like that. It's an interesting point, but in any case, it's a somewhat different question, I think.
Right. Next week we'll do assault weapons, but right now the floor is open for any members of the class or auditors to ask questions. And we'll start on this side.
Hi, thank you. In the United States, there are approximately 400 million firearms in circulation.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit more?
Yeah. So in the United States, there are approximately 400 million firearms in circulation, give or take. There are strategies such as buyback programs that attempt to get guns off the streets and cool-down periods that delay the pickup of guns after purchase. But realistically, I don't see a future or a near future where gun quantity in the U.S. significantly decreases. And so, to me, gun regulation becomes more of a social problem that involves investing in education to reduce certain inequalities, creating after-school programs or community programs to give people a place to go, or addressing mental health crises. So, for both of you, what are your opinions on this solution to reduce gun-related crime and violence?
Well, you're right. There are lots of measures that one can adopt to try to reduce crime. The U.S. has gone very strongly into a combination of locking up a lot of people and also making guns more permissive, or gun regulation more permissive. I think that those are sort of competing strategies, and as you say, I think there are more humane ways of reducing crime. My mentor, co-author, Nobel Prize winner Jim Heckman has written a lot on the ability of preschool enrichment programs to reduce subsequent criminality. Unfortunately, in the United States, if you tell politicians that you want to fund something today that will generate benefits in reducing crime 15 years from now, they're very unhappy, which is what preschool enrichment requires, even though if we did do that funding, 15 years from now, we could reduce crime substantially. So you're right, many things that can be done. The big question for this audience, though, is are we increasing the crime problem by adopting a strategy which every other affluent nation in the world has rejected, and they enjoy much, much lower crime rates than we have?
My answer to your question is probably banal, but I think the answer has to be we want to see whether they work. And in principle, preschool or after-school enrichment programs might be wonderful, or they might be pointless, or they might be counterproductive, or maybe some are good and some are bad. So I'd like to know what actually works and not just what sounds like it'll work. But I do want to point out two graphs. So that ties into what John was saying. That is the decline in firearms homicide deaths. And by the way, the non-firearms also declined comparably from 1993 to 2010, twofold. And then from 1993 to 2011, non-fatal violent crime decline. That is basically fourfold. No, not fatal violent firearm crime. The non-firearm crime rate, I think, did not decline quite as much. That's not because of new gun controls. Now, there were some gun controls during that period, like the assault weapons ban, which was really a ban on new assault weapons. I doubt that John would say that any significant portion of this came from that, among other things, because most ordinary firearms crimes do not involve these so-called assault weapons. And in any event, there were still plenty of them around. Something happened. John has theories, which are very interesting theories, but something happened. So the answer is that one of my answers would be, I'd love to know what happened so that we can duplicate it, or at least keep it from going back, which it looks like it is increasing in some measure, although hard to know for sure. So I'm all in favor of reducing gun violence, and because I'm in favor of reducing violence, especially lethal violence, and crime in general, whether firearms or not. And something seems to have done that, and maybe we can't replicate that, but that's what I want to know. Let me give you one other slide. So this is specifically with regard to violent crime against youths aged 12 to 17. So this is from Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey. Now maybe this is all wrong, because when I looked at it, I thought this cannot possibly be right. But this is what it says, that from 1994 to 2010, there was a 95% reduction in the firearms homicide rate. It didn't reduce to 95% of the original. It reduced to 5% of the original. It fell by a factor of 20, this serious violent crime. I think it may be non-fatal, but in any event, with firearms. And again, I don't think it's because of gun controls. And if there were, like, gun controls for 12 to 17-year-olds, even gun rights supporters tend to support those in some measure. So there are all sorts of interesting things I'd like to explore. It's not clear to me that the various gun control proposals that we've heard are among them.
Yeah, this is data from the National Crime Victimization Survey. So these are people who were interviewed, so it doesn't have homicide in there. But it is important to see, as Eugene notes, very substantial drops in violent crime. But remember my earlier slide, Americans thought crime was rising over that period of time, even though crime was dropping very substantially. And this is, again, a challenge for the American voters, because they're often voting with very inaccurate views about what's actually happening with crime, and it makes them very exploitable by what I think the founders would refer to as our objectionable politicians.
Over to this side.
Maybe even promiscuous ones.
It was mentioned a couple of times that countries that are comparable to the US, mostly, for instance, Europe, have very different attitudes towards gun ownership. Do we understand where that massive difference comes from? And if we do, is there anything that we can have from that understanding we can bring back here to impact what's happening here?
Well, I think the Supreme Court has made it a lot harder to do what you suggest, Andreas. And I think it's one of the dangers of what the founders referred to as the specious mask of zeal for the rights of the people. Once you create this very emboldened sense of rights, it makes people much less susceptible to considering what the consequences are. But just to give an example, Canada, Australia, England, these are all countries with very similar backgrounds to the United States. It is not a permissible basis to seek a gun in those countries because you want a gun for self-defense. So it's a very different conception of what should be allowed, and it's part of the reason why Canada, Australia, and England have much lower homicide rates than we do.
So I wanted to point out a few things about this international comparison. Let me skip this, sorry. So this is from Martin Kilias, who is, I think, fairly characterized as generally an anti-gun criminologist. And he had a study, this is 2001, maybe there have been more recent ones, Guns, Violent Crime, and Suicide in 21 countries. Found no statistically significant correlation between gun ownership and total suicide, homicide, assault, and robbery. Of course, there are massive differences from country to country. Suicide is a classic example. Some countries are very have a much higher rates of suicide than others. Cultural differences, maybe criminological differences, didn't seem to be correlation between gun ownership and such totals. Now, there was correlation for suicide with a gun, homicide with a gun, but only homicide of women, not of men, assault with a gun, and robbery with a gun. But again, it doesn't really matter to me whether somebody commits suicide with a gun or not. Maybe attempts to commit suicide with a gun are more likely to be lethal than attempts to commit them with drugs, although it's complicated why that might be so. But this is for the actual outcomes. So it may very well be that decreasing gun ownership rate may change the mechanism for suicide or the mechanism for assault or robbery or homicide. I'm not terribly interested in though in those that second category, because ultimately the result is equally harmful. So what I'm interested in is the actual total suicide. I'm actually less interested in suicide, but many are. Homicide, assault, and robbery, and it didn't seem to be something found there. Likewise, if you look at comparative evidence through continental Europe, and I wish I remembered the year of this, it's also probably about 20 years old, US had a homicide rate that was much higher than all those countries, and a gun ownership rate that was quite high. But then you had 36% gun ownership rate in Norway, homicide rate less than half of 39% in Finland. You had the Netherlands, which had a higher homicide rate than Norway, even though it had a much lower gun ownership rate. So I guess I'm not really sure how much of the difference is the gun ownership rate and how much is some other factors that might make one country more or less criminal. But the other factor in any event is the 400 million number. Even if we thought it would be good to have our country have the gun stock of a Japan, which is tiny, or of an England, which is still a lot lower, I'm not sure there's a way to get there. And finally, let me close with one thing. I do think that arguments for trying to emulate European or Australian or Japanese or whatever gun control laws are not implausible. I think we have to consider them. But remember, one of the things that people often say with regard to even modest gun controls is, you're trying to ban these guns, your goal ultimately is to ban all guns. And a normal reaction from many people is, oh, that's just paranoia. That's just nonsense. Obviously, nobody is coming to take away your guns. And now we have a serious discussion, as I think we should, about whether the solution is to have a regime that basically takes away people's guns. So it may be that following foreign countries' gun control laws should be on the table. But if we do seriously think it should be on the table, then at least we should recognize that people's worry about a slippery slope is empirically not implausible. Now, maybe we think that the bottom of the slope is actually good. Maybe we want to welcome the slippage. But that's one reason that people worry even about modest gun controls, is they're afraid much more serious gun controls are coming down the pike.
Yeah, and I do think one of the dangers about gun control is that it does allow demagogic politicians to whip people into a frenzy. I mean, the idea that we would get rid of all guns in the U.S. is so far from reality that it really is not a legitimate concern. Plus, on top of that, we now have the Heller decision, and indeed one of the ironic predictions of a law professor at NYU, James Jacobs. He had written something before Heller. He said, look, we should just give the right a Heller-type decision, because then they'll calm down, they'll know that they have a constitutional right, and there will be no more demagoguing about guns. But the demagoguing has accelerated probably tenfold since 2008, so be wary about predictions by law professors.
Professor Donahue, thank you for your time. When the conversation moved to the subject of rights, you said that, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if there is a right to defend oneself as one sees fit, it's not worth the trouble, or at least the cost may outweigh the benefits. I believe, or I think that the American tradition has always been to say that our rights do not depend on empirical outcomes. I would ask, in other arenas, if you performed an empirical analysis and found that American protections for free speech resulted in 30,000 additional deaths every year, would you say that the First Amendment should be circumscribed if you could find and were confident that eliminating due process would also cut the violent crime rate in half? Would that be on the chopping block as well?
Well, as I said, there are some rights that we do think of as fundamental, and that we are willing to give up quite a lot to protect those. It just seems to me that the right to bear arms is just a purely instrumental type of right, and I would not give up a lot to protect the right to use a gun for self-defense if it led to many thousands of additional deaths per year, as I think it does. That's too high a price to pay for what I think is a purely instrumental right.
Well, look, I'm a big believer in a lot of individual rights, but it's in large part because I think they're both important to individuals for kind of inherent reasons, but they're also practically good for society. So let's take one example, the jury trial. I think jury trial is pretty important. There are lots of countries that don't have it. If I were convinced that juries in civil cases or in criminal cases really were a very bad idea, and all of the possible long-term benefits, such as restraining the government and such, are actually better served through other means, I think we have to consider, maybe we should have a more continental European system rather than Anglo-American system. When it comes to privacy and searches and seizures, the Fourth Amendment, to be sure, it specifically calls for a kind of weighing, but there's the reasonableness prohibition test. It's not all searches and seizures that are prohibited, it's unreasonable ones. Privacy is important, but for good enough reason it can be restrained. Free speech, I've made a career out of arguing in favor of, I like to think of analyzing free speech issues, but often arguing in favor of pretty broad notions of free speech. But yeah, if you could show that some speech restrictions could save thousands of lives a year and not have indirect harmful consequences, such as empowering the government to kill a lot more people a year, yeah, I'd be open to some of them. And in fact, we already have some, right? Restrictions on incitement of imminent lawless conduct. Narrow restriction, probably doesn't save a lot of lives, but maybe saves some. Well, that's okay. Restrictions on fighting words, face-to-face insults that are likely to start a fight, also okay. Supreme Court has often said, and I don't think it's going to change its mind, that you can ban the publication dates of troop ships in time of war. It seems kind of quaint today when it's all about satellites and everything else. But the notion was, if there could be hundreds of soldiers or sailors killed, or thousands, then yeah, some restrictions are justifiable. So I am hesitant to say, let justice be done though the heavens fall. My view is let justice be done but not if the heavens fall. That, these rights are very strong presumptions, in part because we know there are structural, indirect, and hard to predict harms that come out of surrendering certain rights, especially free speech, maybe especially due process and such. But we do tolerate certain kinds of restrictions on them, and we might even tolerate total retreat from that right. Privilege against self-incrimination is another thing. It's in the Constitution. Not sure it's a great idea. We should be open to discussing should it be repealed or not. At that level, I do agree with John's general analysis of rights writ large. We have to consider practicality, because I do think it's important to recognize we should have rights to be free from private violence and not just governmental violence. And we need to take that into account in calculating good rights policy.
Thank you both so much for being here. This might be a highly reductionist sort of like summary of Professor Volok's argument, but it seems as though, we've got this issue of almost 500 million guns in the country, and the proposal is, well, we have to deal with that. And it seems as though it's then fight fire with fire, literally and figuratively. And so I'm curious, is there a world in which, you actually address more of the root cause? And there's other countries, you mentioned Australia, where 3 decades ago bought back, 500,000 guns and haven't had a mass shooting in 3 decades since. I'm curious if, again, there's any world in which you address the root cause more, and or if there have been financial and more empirical evaluations of what that would look like. Because, it does seem like, we're looking at, the implications of a policy, but I'd be curious, again, looking at the behavior and if you can address it.
Right. So I'm not sure, when people say root cause, they may often say, what's the root cause of crime? I'm always in favor of thinking about the root cause of crime while recognizing that it's very hard to do much about it. But it would be interesting if you could find some mechanism, some explanation for what happened from 1993 to 2010, and bottle it and duplicate it. That would be lovely. And if I thought that one of the reasons was, say, the assault weapons ban, I think there's lots of reason to think that it was not a part at all, certainly not a major part, I would say, okay, I'd be open to restriction like that, especially since it's not a total ban on guns or even anything close to it. But if by root cause, you seem to suggest the root cause is the existence of the guns. And to me, it's kind of like saying the root cause of a lot of crime is alcohol or drugs. It is true that many crimes are stimulated by alcohol and drugs, that somebody may get drunk and get into a fight that otherwise wouldn't have, or be on drugs and because he's addicted to drugs commits robberies or thefts or whatever else, or just deliberately kills someone because of psychotic break or whatever else. But to ask to ask what to do about that doesn't necessarily ask us how can we best outlaw drugs, because one possible answer might be that trying to outlaw them does more harm than good. That's the answer we have come with regard to alcohol. That's the answer we seemingly are coming to with regard to marijuana, which, to be sure, is one of the least dangerous of the hard drugs, or of the drugs. And it may be the answer we may come to with regard to cocaine and heroin and various other drugs as well. And if we do, I don't think I wouldn't be particularly upset that somehow we're not dealing with the root cause, if the root cause there is, in fact, the substance. The real question is, what is likely to work? And I do think that in a country with 400 million guns, a buyback is not going to work.
Why would you think that?
Well, so buyback, there are two versions of it. One is the literal one, which sounds nice because it sounds non-coercive, which is, we'll just buy back some guns. And it's optional. But, maybe if we take some guns off the street, then they won't be stolen, they won't be misused and such. I think every attempts to do that have basically yielded, at least in the US, yielded virtually no guns bought back. And the ones that have been, unsurprisingly, are basically broken down guns. And somebody may say, oh, they're paying $200 for a gun. Well, this gun is probably worth 20 bucks. I'm gonna sell it back and then buy a really nice gun. Well, $200, at least put it towards the purchase of a really nice gun. So I just think as a practical matter, point me to some American or even other actual buyback that worked. I've never seen one. Now,
Australia.
sometimes, I'm sorry, one sec. Sometimes when people say buyback, that's kind of a euphemism for prohibition. But prohibition with some compensation. Yes, we will throw you in prison for continuing to possess this gun. But, if you turn it in, we not only will give you amnesty, we'll pay you $200 or something like that. Well, you could try to say that, and you could basically create a new class of, I don't know, 80 to 120 or more million. I mean, it's half the households, not all of the residents of the households. Let's say the many tens of millions of felons, whose view would be, first of all those demagogues that people were worried about, those were actually truth tellers. And the people who were calling them demagogues, they're the ones who are trying to pull the wool over our eyes. Really, all this confiscation that we were warned about is actually happening. And my position with regard to the government now is the government is the one that wants to throw me in prison for keeping these tools that I think are necessary. Now, maybe you think that has a happy ending. I don't.
John?
I mean, I agree with Eugene that it's impractical right now in the United States to think of any major buyback effort. It's costly, and you can't even get Congress to hold a vote on universal background checks when 90% of Americans and 75% of NRA members support universal background checks. So something that is not only not controversial, but overwhelmingly supported by the public is beyond the capacity of the American political system to deliver. So anything that's more controversial than that has zero chance. And so the question is, what can be done? I still think there are avenues for tweaking of government policy towards guns that could be helpful, but we're going to have a higher crime rate than would be ideal simply because of the political realities. Now, I should say there are many things that could be done to address crime that we're probably not doing now. We've mentioned some of them like preschool enrichment programs, but those are all expensive. And it just goes to the general challenges of public policy. There are costs and benefits, and trying to understand optimal policy is extremely challenging because, first of all, you have to try to figure out what the optimal policy is, then try to convince enough other people that you know what the optimal policy is, and then try to get the political system to deliver that. Those are all three difficult steps.
Last question.
Thank you both.
Hi. Hi, thank you both so much for your insights. My question's directed to Eugene. So a large proportion of the data discussed in this debate is regarding survey data, which you both acknowledged as being much less reliable. So I was curious if you had a response to some of the metrics that John shared towards the beginning of the debate. You've already shared your thoughts on the international comparison, but I was wondering if you had a response to his discussion of California, Texas, and New York, and there being a direct correlation between homicides in those states and gun control legislation.
Sure. So the question of the California, Texas, and New York is an interesting illustration, and I'm not against viewing that as a kind of anecdote. But the real question is not what happens with three particular states, that one could find three particular states that may have a very different profile. The real question is what happens when you look at all of the states and categorize them by shall issue or permitless on one side, no issue, may issue on the other side, and then try to figure out what the big picture is. And that's what I showed, that the big picture is John's studies show that there's real, at least a real increase in violent crime, and not. I don't think that your study showed a statistically significant increase, but maybe nearly significant increase in total homicide. So that's the data that I have. But there was something else that you'd asked before, which is surveys. So let me just tell you the stories about two acronyms, the UCR and the NCVS. So there's the Uniform Crime Reports, and the National Crime Victimization Survey. And they both aim to measure the amount of crime in the US. We've talked a good deal about the NCVS because also it is the one that yielded the very low 100,000 defensive gun users, but it's a study, it's a survey just like the other surveys are. The UCR gathers information from police departments. And one thing that one finds is that the UCR data provides vastly lower crime rates than for the NCVS. For a long time, the Gulf was especially serious with regard to rape and other sex crimes, but it is also serious with regard to, we're talking about factors of 2, 3, 4, or something like that, with regard to theft, with regard to burglary, with regard to basically all crimes. So on the one hand, the NCV, and if you ask, I think, most criminologists, which is the number that they trust more, they trust the survey data. Because the police data is biased. First of all, it's biased by what the police choose to report. Like, actually, some, I think, departments don't even participate. Some, I have seen evidence that they just miscategorize things. But also, it's biased by what people report to the police. There are a lot of crimes that aren't reported to the police for a variety of reasons. Some of them, people just don't trust the police, or the crime is by someone who's a relative or a spouse or something like that, and they don't want to get the person in trouble for a variety of reasons. And then there's a long list of other just reasons. So the real question with a lot of this information is as compared to what, right? So in a sense, the NCVS is very weak, because it's based on survey data, and you have the problem that some of the respondents may be drunk or crazy or have an agenda. UCR is weak because the amount of crime reported to the police appears to be only a fairly small portion of the amount of crime that's actually out there. So again, I think most criminologists, you can tell me if I'm wrong, trust survey data somewhat more, although a lot depends on the survey. And we'd all love to have more information that's not survey data, but it's hard to get, I think.
Yeah, so Gene is standing up for NCVS, but not so much when it says low levels of defensive gun use.
All I'm saying is the NCVS is more trusted than the UCR.
Yeah, although, again, what you're most concerned about is, do they show the same patterns? Clearly, UCR is offenses known to police, and so if it's not reported, it wouldn't show up in the police data, and it has some of the other problems that Eugene mentions. But if you do want an actual count of the number of crimes, NCVS for the nation would give you better data, although the problem with the NCVS for the type of work that my team and I try to do is that it doesn't give you local evidence. We're trying to break through that impediment, but the National Crime Victimization Survey doesn't tell you where the respondents are from to sort of protect identity. But you're absolutely right that these are challenging issues to sort through. There are problems with the data. And again, it's one problem that I have very much with groups like the NRA, which are dedicated to try to undermine the collection of good data. I remember a number of years ago in Texas, after they had moved to right to carry, there was an episode at a bar in Waco, Texas, where 171 people were arrested for a shootout in which many people were shot and killed. And I just tried to get information on how many of those 171 people had right to carry permits, because only 4 of the 171 were arrested on not having permit charges. And Texas law, based on an NRA proposed law, prevented that information coming into the public space for the obvious reason that they don't want to allow people to know when right to carry permit holders commit crime.
I'm sorry.
John, I don't want to speak to NRA or its motivations. Obviously, it's an advocacy group, just like Brady Campaign is an advocacy group. They have their own imperatives. But just if we're stepping back and trying to figure out good policy, for a lot of things, there's an important question of how we value research versus individual privacy. And we have different results. We'd have much better research about how colleges deal with sex crime investigations or sexual assault investigations under Title IX if all of that data were publicly accessible. Private colleges, public colleges, you could imagine Congress passing a statute saying that all the data and all the names of all the accused and all of the accusers will be made available so that scholars like John or like me could go out there and do this analysis. And by the way, that is the decision we have with regard to criminal justice system, where in fact criminal prosecutions, most information, although not all with regard to witnesses and victims, is publicly available. But some of the time we say more privacy. Some of the time we say more transparency. So I'm not terribly interested in motivations of advocacy groups. But when it comes to a question, for example, of whether you need a license to do something and do something controversial, then it's an interesting and important question we have to research. To what extent should that be more private, and to what extent should it be more transparent? And I don't think appealing to groups' motivations resolves that question.
But I would just say, once you've been arrested for shooting, it's nice to have the public know whether you had a right to carry permit or not, and that's what the law protects against, because that was a very important motivation of the passage of the law.
I'm going to apologize to our last standing questioner because we promised to get Eugene over to the other side of campus fairly quickly. Graham, before we take the next poll, can you put on the screen what the first response to the question before the conversation was, and then afterwards?
The first response has been cleared, but it was about 2/3 saying yes and 1/3 saying no.
Okay. Now we do the second poll. We don't award prizes based on the change of views.
But I like the tension. I like the competition.
Okay.
Well, all right. John, I think you've won.
I always believe in survey evidence.
So thank you both very much for a very stimulating conversation.